My landlord walked into the courtroom with a tablet full of evidence and a smile on her face. But after the judge asked her one simple question, she didn't say another word. 4 months ago, I walked into my house after work and froze. My landlord, Mrs. Krause, was in my bedroom going through my closet, tossing my belongings on the floor. This was the 5th time, and I'd only moved in 3 weeks ago. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't even look up. "Checking for unauthorized storage. You need to give me 24-hour notice before entering. It's in the lease." She turned around and laughed in my face. "This is my property. I don't need permission." I stood there feeling my face get hot. She'd already moved my furniture around, went through my mail, even accidentally left my front door unlocked for anyone to waltz in one of the days. I'd tried to be polite before, but that night I finally put my foot down. I physically pushed her out and immediately sent a picture of the exact lease section about 24-hour notice for entry. She texted back immediately. "I'm sorry. You're correct. Please forgive me. This will not happen again." I was surprised but also happy. The next week she didn't come into my home even once. The problem was solved. Then 7 days later, I woke up for work like normal. I just paid my first month's rent the day before. But when I got home that evening, my key didn't work. I tried it 3 times before realizing the lock had been changed. Then I noticed something around the side of my house. I walked out and saw all my stuff. My TV, my clothes and trash bags, my dishes on the curb. Everything I owned was sitting on the street. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Krause. "I'm keeping your deposit for early termination. You have 1 hour to remove your belongings from my property." I couldn't breathe. I called my brother and thankfully he let me stay at his. The next morning I called a lawyer. "This is illegal eviction. We're suing her for $5,000. We filed the lawsuit, and Mrs. Krause's texts started immediately. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'll bury you in court. Drop this lawsuit now, or you'll be sorry." I've done this before. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing, gathering absolutely everything. Then I walked into the courthouse. This was a slam dunk case. I was going to win. Until I saw Mrs. Krause with her lawyer. She was carrying a thick leather folder. She looked right at me and smiled like she had an ace up her sleeve. Her lawyer walked straight over to me. He was smiling too. "We filed a countersuit this morning," he said, handing my lawyer the papers. "Your client owes Mrs. Krause $7,000 in damages." My lawyer's face went white. He pulled me aside and started flipping through the papers. "This is bad," he whispered. "We have zero preparation for this. She's claiming you put dozens of holes in the walls. She has evidence. Did you do this?" "No, that's impossible. I barely unpacked." Mrs. Krause was across the hallway watching us panic, loving every second of it. "All rise for Judge Whitmore." We walked into the courtroom. My hands were shaking. My lawyer presented my case first. The illegal eviction, the photos of my belongings on the street, everything. Judge Whitmore took notes and nodded. Then Mrs. Krause's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client had legitimate reasons for the eviction. The defendant caused significant property damage. We have video evidence." He pulled out a tablet and showed it to the judge. Mrs. Krause stood next to him looking confident. Judge Whitmore studied the video carefully. I couldn't see what was on the screen, but I could see his face. He was frowning. "Your Honor," Mrs. Krause said, "if you look at the bedroom, you can see the damage." Judge Whitmore squinted at the screen. "Where exactly?" "I don't see any holes in these walls." "That's because the holes are behind the posters on the walls, Your Honor. The defendant hung posters to cover the dozens of holes they punched into my walls." The judge looked up at her. "The holes are behind the posters?" "Yes, Your Honor. I didn't want to remove his posters to show the holes for privacy, but they're definitely there." Judge Whitmore set down the tablet. "When was this video taken?" "While the defendant was living there, Your Honor." There was a long pause. "Since you mentioned respecting her privacy, I'm assuming you asked her permission to enter the home and film this video?" Mrs. Krause's confident smile disappeared. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Missy Krause, I asked you a question. Did you have permission to enter and record this video?" Your Honor, it's my property." "That's not what I asked. Yes or no?" Mrs. Krause looked around. Yes, Your Honor. I asked him for permission." My face dropped. My lawyer shot up immediately. "Mrs. Krause is committing perjury, Your Honor." Her face was white. She was lying, and she knew it. "You illegally entered my client's home," my lawyer continued. "You illegally filmed her bedroom. Then you used that illegal film to file a fake countersuit that defames my client. We have proof of this right here. Do you still claim you had permission to record his bedroom?" Mrs. Krause's knees buckled. Judge Whitmore leaned forward in his chair and stared directly at Mrs. Krause. He asked her again if she was absolutely certain she had my permission to film inside my bedroom. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then she stammered that yes, she definitely asked me first. But her voice cracked on the word definitely. Everyone in the courtroom could hear the lie. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the edge of the witness stand. My lawyer stood up fast and his chair scraped against the floor. He pulled out a folder and walked toward the judge's bench. He told the court he had my complete phone records from the entire time I lived in that house. He showed the judge page after page. Not a single call from Mrs. Kraus. Not a single text asking for permission to enter or film. Zero. He then pulled out my lease and pointed to the section about 24-hour written notice. He read it out loud so everyone could hear. Mrs. Kraus had violated this requirement over and over again. The judge took the phone records and studied them carefully. He looked up at Mrs. Kraus and asked her to explain something. If she followed proper procedure and asked my permission like she claimed, where was the documentation? Where was any record of her requesting to enter? Mrs. Kraus fumbled through her thick leather folder. Her hands were shaking worse now. Pages fell out and scattered on the floor. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear. She kept flipping through papers looking for something that didn't exist. The judge waited. The whole courtroom waited. She finally stopped searching and just stood there looking defeated. My lawyer wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and showed the judge something on the screen. He explained this was a text message Mrs. Kraus sent me after I confronted her about entering without permission. He read it out loud for everyone to hear. She had apologized. She admitted I was correct. She promised it would never happen again. Judge Whitmore took the phone and read the message himself. He looked at Mrs. Kraus with this expression like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He asked her a simple question. How could she claim she had my permission to film when she literally apologized for entering without permission? How did that make any sense? Mrs. Kraus's face turned bright red. She started talking really fast about how she meant something different in that text, how the apology was about something else entirely, how the filming was separate from the other entries. Judge Whitmore held up his hand and cut her off mid-sentence. He stated clearly and firmly that the video evidence was obtained illegally. It violated my tenant rights and my reasonable expectation of privacy. Therefore, it could not be used to support any claims in her countersuit. Mrs. Kraus looked like she might pass out. Her lawyer jumped up immediately and tried to salvage the situation. He argued that regardless of how the video was obtained, the wall damage still existed. He said the holes were real and someone needed to verify them. My lawyer shot to his feet and objected. He told the judge that unverified claims weren't evidence. He requested an independent property inspection by a court-appointed inspector to document the actual condition of the walls. Judge Whitmore nodded and agreed. He ordered both parties to provide access to the property within 48 hours. A court-appointed inspector would examine everything and document it with photos. Both lawyers had to be present during the inspection. Mrs. Kraus looked panicked. Her face went from red to white in seconds. She knew there were no holes behind those posters. She knew the inspector would find nothing. Her lawyer tried to whisper something to her, but she just shook her head. Judge Whitmore announced the hearing would be recessed for 3 days while the inspection took place. He banged his gavel and everyone stood up. I walked out of that courtroom and finally felt like I could breathe. The pressure that had been crushing my chest for weeks was gone. My lawyer caught up with me in the hallway. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me this turned in our favor the moment she lied under oath. Everything changed in that courtroom. 2 days later, I was sitting at my brother's place trying to focus on anything except the inspection. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. The inspector had just arrived at the rental house. Both lawyers were there. I wasn't allowed to be present, but he promised to keep me updated. My phone kept buzzing over the next hour. Text after text. They were going through the living room. Nothing unusual. Moving to the kitchen. Normal wear and tear. Checking the bathroom. Everything looked fine. Then they entered my former bedroom. This was it. The inspector walked straight to the wall where my posters had been hanging. Everyone watched as he carefully removed each poster. Mrs. Kraus stood in the corner with her arms crossed. My lawyer said her face looked sick. The inspector peeled back the first poster. The wall behind it was perfect. Just some minor marks from the poster tape itself. He removed the second poster. Same thing. Clean wall, normal tape residue. He kept going. Poster after poster. Every single wall section he checked showed no holes, no damage, just normal wear and tear from the tape. My lawyer sent me a photo. I zoomed in on the wall behind where my movie poster had hung. Smooth, undamaged, exactly how I left it. Mrs. Kraus apparently tried to claim the inspector wasn't looking in the right spots, but there were only 4 walls in that bedroom. The inspector had checked every single inch. He took photos of everything from multiple angles. He documented the tape marks. He measured the walls. He checked behind where furniture had been. Nothing. No holes, no damage, just a normal bedroom wall that a tenant had lived in for 3 weeks. My lawyer sent the photos to my phone an hour after the inspection finished. I opened the first one and zoomed in on the wall behind where my movie poster had been. Smooth, clean, just some light marks from the tape I'd used to hang the poster. I scrolled through the rest. Every single wall section looked the same. Normal, undamaged, exactly how I'd left them when Mrs. Kraus dumped my stuff on the street. My lawyer texted me that Mrs. Kraus apparently tried to tell the inspector he wasn't checking the right spots, but there were only 4 walls in that bedroom. The inspector had photographed every inch. He'd checked behind where each poster hung. He'd examined the corners. He'd looked at the baseboards. Nothing. No holes. No damage. Just a regular bedroom that someone lived in for 3 weeks. The inspector's official report arrived the next day. My lawyer forwarded it to me as a PDF. I read through it sitting at my brother's kitchen table. The report stated clearly that there was no evidence of the extensive wall damage claimed in the countersuit. The inspector noted some minor scuff marks on the walls that were consistent with normal occupancy. He found one small nail hole from a previous tenant's picture frame. That was it. Everything else was normal wear and tear. The kind of marks that happen when someone actually lives in a space. The inspector had taken measurements. He'd documented everything with timestamps. He'd even noted the type of tape residue left behind from my posters. Professional. Thorough. Completely destroying Mrs. Krause's fake claims about dozens of holes I supposedly punched in her walls. 3 days later, I walked back into the courthouse. My stomach felt tight, but I wasn't panicking like last time. Judge Whitmore was already at his bench when we entered the courtroom. He had papers spread out in front of him, the inspection report. I could tell he'd read it before we even sat down. His expression told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. He looked at Mrs. Krause, then at her lawyer, then back at the papers. He wasn't smiling. Mrs. Krause sat at her table looking smaller than before. Her thick leather folder was closed. She kept glancing at her lawyer like she wanted him to fix this. But there was nothing to fix. The evidence was clear. My lawyer stood up and presented the inspection report to the court. He walked through each page. The photos showing pristine walls, the inspector's detailed notes, the measurements, the timestamps, everything. Mrs. Krause's lawyer jumped up the moment my lawyer finished. He tried to argue that I must have repaired the walls before the inspection happened. My lawyer didn't even let him finish. He pointed out that I hadn't had access to the property since Mrs. Krause illegally evicted me. I'd been locked out. My key didn't work. How exactly was I supposed to repair walls in a house I couldn't enter? Mrs. Krause's lawyer stumbled over his words, trying to come up with some explanation. Judge Whitmore held up his hand. The courtroom went quiet. He looked directly at Mrs. Krause and asked her a simple question. Was she claiming that I somehow broke into the property I was illegally evicted from just to repair damage that would have actually helped my case against her? Mrs. Krause opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at her lawyer. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked back at the judge. Nothing came out. She realized how completely absurd that sounded. Breaking into a house to repair walls that would prove I didn't damage them in the first place. Judge Whitmore waited. Mrs. Krause stayed quiet. My lawyer didn't waste the moment. He shifted to the illegal eviction itself. He pulled out the photos of my belongings dumped on the curb, my TV sitting on the street, my clothes in trash bags, everything I owned just thrown outside like garbage. Then he showed the text message where Mrs. Krause told me she was keeping my deposit and I had 1 hour to remove my stuff. He read it out loud to the court. He argued this was clear retaliation for me asserting my legal rights about the 24-hour notice requirement. I'd stood up for myself. I'd pushed her out of my bedroom when she was going through my stuff. I'd sent her the lease section proving she needed permission to enter. And 7 days later, she changed my locks and threw me out. Judge Whitmore studied the photos. He read the text message himself. Then he asked Mrs. Krause directly why she changed the locks and removed my belongings without following any legal eviction procedures. Mrs. Krause finally spoke up. She claimed I had abandoned the property, just left it, didn't want to live there anymore. Judge Whitmore raised his eyebrows. My lawyer immediately pulled out my bank records showing I'd paid my first month's rent the day before the illegal eviction. He showed my work schedule proving I'd been living there continuously. My brother had even written a statement about me calling him that night when I found my stuff on the street. Mrs. Krause's abandonment claim fell apart in seconds. Her lawyer tried one more angle. He stood up and argued that my physical removal of Mrs. Krause from the property constituted assault. That gave her grounds for immediate eviction without following normal procedures. She felt threatened. She had to act fast. My lawyer countered immediately. I had the legal right to remove a trespasser from my rented space. Mrs. Krause had entered my bedroom without permission, without notice. She was going through my closet and throwing my belongings on the floor. I didn't hit her. I didn't threaten her. I just physically guided her out of my private space and locked the door. That's not assault. That's protecting my home from someone who was violating my lease rights. Judge Whitmore picked up the lease and read through it again. He took his time. Everyone in the courtroom just sat there waiting. Finally, he set it down and spoke. He noted that even if there had been some kind of violation on my part, Mrs. Krause was still required to provide written notice. She had to give me a chance to fix whatever problem she claimed existed. She had to follow proper legal channels for eviction through the court system. She did none of that. She just changed my locks and threw my stuff outside. My lawyer stood up one more time. He requested the full $5,000 in damages that we'd originally sued for, plus my security deposit that Mrs. Krause kept illegally, plus court costs for having to fight this case, plus attorney fees for all the hours he'd spent defending me against her fraudulent countersuit. He argued that Mrs. Krause's pattern of harassment started the moment I moved in, going through my mail, moving my furniture, entering my bedroom 5 times in 3 weeks. Then when I finally stood up for my rights, she retaliated by illegally evicting me. The illegal eviction caused me significant hardship. I lost my home. I had to move in with my brother. I had to take time off work to deal with this lawsuit. I had to pay legal fees to defend myself against fake damage claims, all because Mrs. Kraus couldn't handle a tenant who knew their rights and wasn't afraid to enforce them. Her lawyer grabbed her arm to steady her and whispered something fast in her ear. Then he turned to the judge and cleared his throat. Your Honor, perhaps we can reach an agreement here. My client is willing to return the security deposit in full and withdraw the countersuit if the plaintiff agrees to drop his lawsuit. Judge Whitmore set down his pen and looked directly at the lawyer. His face didn't change. That's not how this works, counselor. Your client just committed perjury in my courtroom. She filed fraudulent claims backed by illegally obtained evidence. We're well past the negotiation stage. Mrs. Krause's lawyer opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at his client and then back at the judge. My lawyer stayed quiet, but I could see him trying not to smile. Judge Whitmore picked up his notes and organized them into a neat stack. The courtroom went completely silent. Everyone just sat there waiting. I could hear someone coughing in the back row. The clock on the wall ticked. Mrs. Krause stared at the table in front of her. Her lawyer kept shuffling papers like he was looking for something that could save them. Judge Whitmore finally looked up. I'm ready to rule. I don't need any additional testimony. My hands were shaking again, but this time it felt different. This time I knew I was going to win. The judge put on his reading glasses and looked at his notes one more time. Then he started talking. In the matter of the illegal eviction claim, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Krause changed the locks and removed the tenant's belongings without following proper legal procedures. She provided no written notice. She did not go through the court system. She simply took matters into her own hands. He paused and looked at Mrs. Krause. I'm awarding the plaintiff the full $5,000 in damages as requested. Additionally, Mrs. Krause must return the security deposit immediately. The amount is $1,200 according to the lease agreement entered into evidence. Furthermore, Mrs. Krause will pay all attorney fees incurred by the plaintiff in defending against the fraudulent countersuit. My lawyer wrote everything down fast. I just sat there letting it sink in. $5,000 plus my deposit plus attorney fees. I'd won everything. Judge Whitmore wasn't done. Now, regarding the countersuit filed by Mrs. Krause, I'm dismissing it entirely. The claims of property damage are not supported by the evidence. The inspection report shows no such damage exists. More importantly, the video evidence presented was obtained through illegal entry into the tenant's private residence. Mrs. Krause violated the lease agreement and the tenant's legal rights by entering without permission and filming without consent. He stopped and took off his glasses. Mrs. Krause, filing false claims wastes this court's time and resources. It also puts an unnecessary burden on defendants who must spend money and time defending against fabricated accusations. I considered holding you in contempt of court. I decided against it, but I want you to understand how seriously I view your actions here today. Mrs. Krause's lawyer stood up and started gathering his papers. He moved fast like he wanted to get out of there. But Judge Whitmore held up his hand. Counselor, please remain seated. I'm not finished. The lawyer froze and slowly sat back down. His face was red. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Both of you need to understand something. Presenting fabricated evidence is serious. Lying under oath is serious. This court relies on truthful testimony to function. When witnesses lie, when lawyers present false evidence, it undermines the entire justice system. He looked at Mrs. Krause. You stood in front of me and swore you had permission to film that video. We have text messages proving that's false. You apologized for entering without permission. Then you came into my courtroom and lied about it. Then he looked at her lawyer. And you, counselor, had a duty to verify the evidence before presenting it. You filed a countersuit based on damage that doesn't exist. I expect better from attorneys practicing in my courtroom. The lawyer nodded and looked down. Mrs. Krause just stared straight ahead. Judge Whitmore picked up another piece of paper. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review. They'll determine whether to pursue perjury charges against Mrs. Krause. Mrs. Krause's face went completely white. She grabbed the edge of the table. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. I realized this wasn't over for her just because the civil case ended. She could actually face criminal charges. Judge Whitmore stood up. This court is adjourned. Everyone rose as he left through the door behind his bench. The moment he was gone, Mrs. Krause's lawyer grabbed his briefcase and walked out fast. He didn't even look at her. She sat there alone for a minute before slowly getting up and leaving through the back door. I turned to my lawyer and he was smiling. We walked out of the courtroom together and down the courthouse steps. The sun was bright after being inside for hours. My lawyer stopped on the sidewalk. Getting the judgment is one thing. Actually collecting the money might be another challenge entirely. I looked at him. What do you mean? The judge ordered her to pay. He nodded. Right. But now we have to enforce that order. If she doesn't pay within 30 days, we'll need to file additional paperwork. Some landlords try to hide their money or just refuse to pay. I've handled dozens of these cases. Sometimes collecting takes months. That worried me. I needed that money. I'd been staying with my brother for weeks and I owed him rent. Plus, I had to find a new place to live. My lawyer must have seen my face because he added, Don't worry too much. Most people pay once they lose in court, especially with the threat of perjury charges hanging over them. She'll probably pay. 2 weeks went by. I kept checking my mail every single day. My brother told me to relax, but I couldn't. Then one afternoon, I came home from work, and there was a large envelope from Mrs. Krause's lawyer's office. I opened it right there on the street. Inside was a check, $6,200, my security deposit plus the $5,000 in damages. There was a short letter saying the attorney fees would be paid separately to my lawyer. I called my lawyer immediately. He answered on the first ring. I got the check. He sounded surprised. Already? That was fast. I thought we'd have to file for enforcement. I could hear him typing on his computer. The perjury referral must have scared her. She probably wants to show good faith to the DA's office. The next day, I went to the bank and deposited the check. Then I met with my lawyer to settle his fees. He charged me $1,800 for everything. It was worth every penny. After that, I drove to my brother's place. He was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in. I handed him $800 in cash. "What's this?" he asked. "Rent for the time I stayed here, plus extra for putting up with my stress." He tried to give it back, but I wouldn't let him. He'd saved me when I had nowhere else to go. The rest of the money, about $3,000, went straight into my savings account. I opened it specifically as an emergency fund. I never wanted to be that vulnerable again. Never wanted to be one bad landlord away from being homeless. The money sat there like a safety net. It meant I could walk away from a bad situation if I needed to. It meant I had options. The next day, I called my lawyer about what to do next. He told me to come to his office so we could file a complaint with the State Rental Housing Board. I drove over that afternoon and he had the paperwork ready. We sat at his desk and he walked me through every section. The form asked for dates of violations, descriptions of what happened, and any evidence I had. I wrote down all 5 times Mrs. Krause entered without permission, the illegal eviction, the fake damage claims, everything. My lawyer attached copies of the text messages, the lease, and the court judgment. He explained that this complaint would create a public record that future renters could check before signing a lease with Mrs. Krause. The housing board would investigate and could fine her or suspend her rental license if they found violations. We submitted everything electronically and got a confirmation number within minutes. 3 days later, I got a call from the housing board. A woman from their enforcement division wanted to schedule an interview to get my detailed statement. I met her at a government office building the following week. She had me sit in a small conference room and recorded our conversation. She asked specific questions about each violation, how many times Mrs. Krause entered without notice, what she did during those entries, how the illegal eviction happened, what evidence I had. The interview took almost 2 hours. She told me they were opening a formal investigation and would contact Mrs. Krause for her side of the story. I asked how long it would take, and she said these cases usually took several months to complete. While that investigation was happening, I started looking for a new apartment. I was done living with my brother even though he never complained. I needed my own space again. But this time I was way more careful. I spent hours researching landlord review sites and checking public records for complaints. My brother helped me make a spreadsheet of properties with ratings, complaint history, and contact information. We went to viewings together on weekends. The first place had great reviews online, but when we showed up, the building was falling apart. The second place looked nice, but had 3 housing board complaints from previous tenants. The third place had a landlord who gave me bad vibes during the tour. My brother agreed we should keep looking. We checked out probably 15 different apartments over 3 weeks. Then I found one managed by a property management company instead of an individual landlord. The online reviews were solid, no housing board complaints, and they had actual professional procedures for everything. I scheduled a viewing and brought my brother along. The property manager met us there with a clipboard and printed materials. She showed us the unit, explained the lease terms clearly, and answered all my questions without getting defensive. They had an online portal for maintenance requests, a 24-hour emergency line, and required written notice for any inspections. The lease was straightforward with no weird clauses. I applied that day and got approved within a week. Moving day felt incredible after months of instability. I rented a truck and my brother helped me load everything. Most of my stuff was still in storage from the illegal eviction. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs for hours. Before I unpacked anything, I walked through the entire apartment with my phone taking photos and videos. I documented every wall, every corner, every appliance. I took close-ups of existing scratches, marks, or damage. I wanted timestamps on everything, so there could never be any confusion about what condition the place was in when I moved in. I learned that lesson the hard way with Mrs. Krause. My brother ordered pizza, and we ate sitting on my floor surrounded by boxes. He told me he was proud of how I handled everything. The first few weeks in my new place were so peaceful. My landlord was professional and respectful. When they needed to do a routine inspection, I got an email notice exactly 24 hours in advance. The property manager knocked before entering even though I gave permission. She checked the smoke detectors and took notes on her clipboard, then thanked me and left. It was such a relief to live somewhere without constantly worrying about someone invading my privacy or going through my stuff. I could relax in my own home for the first time in months. Then about 6 weeks after I moved in, I got a call from the district attorney's office. A prosecutor wanted to meet with me about potentially pressing criminal charges against Mrs. Krause for perjury. I drove downtown to the DA's office and met with him in a small meeting room. He had a copy of the court transcript from my case. He explained that lying under oath is a serious crime, and they were considering charges based on how clearly Mrs. Kraus lied about having permission to film my bedroom. The prosecutor walked me through what would be required if I agreed to cooperate. I would need to testify again, probably at a preliminary hearing and possibly at trial if it went that far. He told me perjury cases are hard to prove because you have to show the person knowingly lied, not just made a mistake. But in my case, the evidence was strong because Mrs. Kraus had literally texted me an apology for entering without permission, then claimed in court she had permission. I asked how long the process would take, and he said probably several months to build the case. I decided to cooperate because Mrs. Kraus needed to face consequences for lying in court. She thought she could just make up whatever she wanted, and the judge would believe her. The prosecutor seemed happy with my decision and said he would be in touch as the investigation progressed. Meanwhile, the housing board investigation was moving forward. The woman who interviewed me called with an update. She told me they had discovered multiple complaints from previous tenants about similar violations. Mrs. Kraus had a pattern of entering units without notice, going through tenant belongings and retaliating against anyone who complained. My case was not unique, just the first one where someone actually fought back in court instead of just moving out quietly. Hearing that made me angry, but also glad I had stood up to her. The housing board completed their investigation 2 months after I filed the complaint. They found Mrs. Kraus violated multiple sections of the state landlord-tenant code. She was fined $2,000 for the documented violations in my case. They also suspended her rental license for 6 months and required her to complete landlord training before it could be reinstated. During the suspension, she could not rent out any properties or collect rent from existing tenants. The housing board sent me a copy of their decision, and I read through all 12 pages. They listed every violation, cited the specific laws she broke, and explained their reasoning for the penalties. It felt good to see official consequences happening beyond just the money she had to pay me. About 3 weeks later, I walked to my mailbox and found a handwritten envelope with no return address. I opened it standing right there on the sidewalk and pulled out a letter from someone named Jonathan, who said he used to rent from Mrs. Kraus 2 years ago. He wrote that he heard about my case through the housing board investigation and wanted to thank me for standing up to her. He explained that Mrs. Kraus did the same things to him, going through his stuff and entering without notice, and when he complained, she made his life so bad that he just moved out early and lost his deposit. Reading his letter made me realize how many people she probably did this to over the years. People who just gave up and walked away because fighting back seemed too hard. Jonathan wrote that seeing someone actually win against her in court helped him feel less alone about what happened to him, like it wasn't his fault for not being able to stop her. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, then walked back inside, feeling glad I hadn't just let it go. The next day, I met with my lawyer at his office to sign some final paperwork about collecting the money from Mrs. Kraus. He had his door open and waved me in with a big smile on his face, which seemed unusual for signing boring legal documents. He told me that 2 more former tenants had filed official complaints against Mrs. Kraus with the housing board, and both of them specifically mentioned my case as the reason they felt brave enough to come forward. My lawyer said he was really proud that I fought back instead of just accepting what happened, because now other people were getting justice too. He explained that landlords like Mrs. Kraus usually get away with this stuff because most tenants don't know their rights or can't afford a lawyer or are just too scared of making things worse. But when one person stands up and wins, it shows everyone else that fighting back is possible and worth doing. He handed me copies of the new complaints and I read through them while sitting in his office. Both stories sounded almost exactly like mine, with Mrs. Kraus entering without permission, going through their belongings and then retaliating when they tried to set boundaries. One guy said she went through his desk and read his personal mail, and when he changed the lock on his bedroom door, she illegally evicted him just like she did to me. The other person was a woman who said Mrs. Kraus rearranged her furniture and kitchen cabinets while she was at work, claiming she was checking for pest problems and then kept her entire security deposit for made-up damages. Reading their experiences made me so angry that Mrs. Kraus had been doing this for years, but also glad that my case was helping stop her from hurting more people. My lawyer told me the housing board was taking all of this very seriously now, and Mrs. Kraus was facing even more penalties on top of what she already got. 4 months had passed since that day I came home to find all my stuff on the street. I was sitting in my new apartment on a Saturday morning drinking coffee and actually feeling relaxed for the first time in forever. The new place was smaller than Mrs. Kraus's house, but it belonged to a real property management company with actual rules and professional staff. My landlord here gave proper notice before any inspections, responded to maintenance requests within 24 hours, and never once went through my personal belongings. I could actually focus on my job again now that I wasn't constantly stressed about coming home to find my stuff moved around or my privacy invaded. My boss even commented that my work had improved a lot over the past month, and I got assigned to a big project that I probably wouldn't have been trusted with when I was barely sleeping and distracted all the time. I looked around my apartment at my TV and my dishes and my clothes, all exactly where I left them, and realized how much energy it takes just to feel safe in your own home. When you don't have that basic security, everything else in your life suffers because you're always on edge waiting for the next violation. Now I could come home and actually relax, and that simple thing made such a huge difference in every other part of my life. My phone rang while I was putting my coffee cup in the sink, and I saw it was the prosecutor's office calling. I answered, and the prosecutor told me they were moving forward with criminal charges against Mrs. Kraus for lying under oath in court. He explained that I would need to testify again at a preliminary hearing, and possibly at trial if the case went that far, but this time I felt completely prepared and confident about what happened. The prosecutor said they had really strong evidence because Mrs. Kraus literally apologized in writing for entering without permission, and then claimed in court that she had permission, which made the lie impossible to deny. He walked me through what to expect at the hearing and told me it would probably happen in about 6 weeks once they finished building the case. I told him I was absolutely willing to testify because Mrs. Kraus needed to face real consequences for thinking she could just make up whatever she wanted, and the judge would believe her. The prosecutor seemed happy with my answer and said he would send me the official paperwork and hearing date once everything was scheduled. After we hung up, I sat down on my couch feeling like this whole thing was finally reaching some kind of real justice, not just getting my money back, but actually holding her accountable for breaking the law. A few days later, my lawyer called to tell me that Mrs. Kraus's lawyer had contacted him trying to work out some kind of deal. He said they wanted to negotiate an agreement where Mrs. Kraus would admit she was wrong about entering my apartment without permission in exchange for the prosecutor dropping the criminal charges. My lawyer explained that this decision wasn't up to me anymore because criminal charges are between the state and the defendant, so the prosecutor would decide whether to accept any deal or not. He told me that Mrs. Kraus was clearly worried about the perjury case because lying in court is a serious crime that could mean jail time, and she was trying to avoid that by admitting to the smaller violation. I asked my lawyer what he thought would happen, and he said it really depended on how strong the prosecutor felt the case was and whether they thought a trial was worth the time and resources. He reminded me that I already won the civil case and got my money, so anything else that happened to Mrs. Kraus was just bonus consequences at this point. I told him I hoped the prosecutor wouldn't let her off easy, just because she was finally willing to admit she did something wrong, but I understood it wasn't my choice to make. The prosecutor called me back about 2 weeks later with an update about the criminal case. He said that perjury charges are really hard to prove in court because you have to show the person knew they were lying and did it on purpose, not that they just made a mistake or misremembered something. Even though the evidence against Mrs. Kraus was pretty clear, he was offering her a plea deal for a lesser charge of making false statements to the court. The prosecutor explained that this was still a criminal conviction, but carried less serious penalties than full perjury, and Mrs. Kraus had accepted the deal to avoid going to trial where she might face jail time. He told me this was actually a good outcome because it meant Mrs. Kraus had to admit guilt on the record and would face real consequences without putting me through another long trial. I asked what the consequences would be, and he said that was up to the judge to decide at sentencing, but the plea deal recommended fines, probation, and community service. Part of the plea deal said that Mrs. Kraus had to pay extra fines on top of what she already owed me from the civil case. She also got banned from being a landlord for 2 full years, which meant she couldn't rent out any properties or collect rent from anyone during that time. The prosecutor explained that this was a really big deal because Mrs. Kraus owned several rental properties, and being a landlord was basically her whole income, so losing that for 2 years would hurt her financially. She also got 1 year of probation where she had to check in regularly with a probation officer and follow strict rules, and if she violated probation, she could end up in jail after all. On top of that, the judge ordered 200 hours of community service that she had to complete within the next year. The prosecutor sent me all the paperwork showing the plea deal terms, and I read through every page carefully, making sure I understood exactly what Mrs. Kraus was admitting to and what penalties she was facing. The sentencing hearing happened on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the plea deal was finalized. I took the day off work and drove downtown to the courthouse, walking through the same doors where my illegal eviction case had been heard months earlier. I sat in the courtroom gallery waiting for Mrs. Kraus to arrive with her lawyer, and when she walked in, she looked smaller somehow, less confident than when she thought she was going to destroy me with her fake countersuit. Judge Whitmore came in, and everyone stood up, and I recognized him immediately as the same judge who had caught Mrs. Kraus lying under oath during my case. He sat down and looked through the paperwork for the sentencing, then looked directly at Mrs. Kraus and started talking about how seriously the court takes false statements and perjury. Judge Whitmore said he remembered my case very clearly, and how Mrs. Kraus had tried to use illegally obtained video evidence to file fraudulent damage claims against me. He explained that lying in court undermines the entire justice system and makes it harder for judges to determine the truth in legitimate disputes. The judge approved all the terms of the plea deal, including the fines, probation, community service, and the 2-year ban on being a landlord. He told Mrs. Kraus that she was lucky the prosecutor offered a plea deal at all, given how clear the evidence was, and if she violated any terms of her probation, she would be brought back to court and could face jail time. Mrs. Kraus nodded and said she understood, and her voice was quiet and shaky, nothing like the confident way she used to laugh in my face when I tried to assert my rights as a tenant. Judge Whitmore dismissed the court, and I walked out feeling like real justice had actually been served. Not just getting money back, but seeing actual consequences happen to someone who thought they were above the rules. Outside the courthouse, I was walking toward my car when someone called out asking if I was the person who sued Mrs. Krause. I turned around and saw a guy about my age standing there looking nervous, and he introduced himself as one of the other former tenants who had filed a complaint with the housing board. We ended up walking to a coffee shop nearby and sitting down to talk about our experiences with Mrs. Krause. He told me his story about how she went through his apartment while he was at work and even read his personal mail, and when he complained, she made up fake violations and threatened to evict him. He said he ended up just moving out and losing his deposit because he didn't think he could fight her, but then he heard about my case and realized he wasn't alone. Talking with him felt good because he really understood what it was like to deal with Mrs. Krause's constant invasions and manipulations, and how hard it was to stand up to someone who acted like they owned you just because they owned the building. We traded phone numbers and he thanked me again for fighting back, saying it helped him feel less stupid for letting her push him around. I told him it wasn't his fault, and that Mrs. Krause had clearly been doing this for years to lots of people, counting on everyone being too scared or too tired to fight back. We finished our coffee and walked back to our cars, and I felt glad that at least some good came out of the whole nightmare experience. That weekend, my brother took me out to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown to celebrate everything being finally done. We ordered food, and he raised his glass and told me he was really proud of how I handled the whole situation with Mrs. Krause. He said most people would have just accepted losing their deposit and moved on, but I actually stood up and fought back even when it seemed scary and expensive. My brother reminded me about that night when I showed up at his place with all my stuff in trash bags after Mrs. Krause illegally evicted me, and how stressed and defeated I looked. He said watching me go through the whole legal process and actually win was inspiring, and now Mrs. Krause was facing real consequences instead of just getting away with it like she probably had for years. I told him I couldn't have done any of it without him letting me stay at his place and supporting me through all the court stuff. He just smiled and said that's what family does, but he was still proud that I didn't give up when things got hard. We finished dinner and drove home, and I realized that even though the whole experience with Mrs. Krause was terrible, I learned that fighting back against unfair treatment is worth the effort, and that standing up for yourself can help protect other people too. A few days after that dinner, I sat down at my laptop and started writing out everything that happened with Mrs. Krause. I typed up the whole story from the first time she went through my closet to the courtroom perjury to the final settlement. Then I sent it to my lawyer asking if it was okay to post online. He called me back the same day and said it looked good, but suggested I remove one paragraph where I called her a terrible person because that was opinion, not fact. I made the changes and then started posting. I found every rental review website I could think of and created accounts on all of them. I posted the review on Apartment Ratings, Rent Jungle, Yelp, Google Reviews, and like 5 other sites I'd never even heard of before. Each post took about 10 minutes because I had to set up the account and verify my email and then copy-paste my review. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight, but I felt good knowing future renters could find this information. The next morning, I woke up to 3 messages in my inbox from people who had read the reviews. One person said they had an appointment to view one of Mrs. Krause's properties that afternoon, but canceled it after reading what I went through. Another person thanked me for posting because they had a similar experience with a different landlord and didn't know they could fight back. The third message was from someone asking if my lawyer would take their case against their own bad landlord. I forwarded that one to my lawyer, and he said he'd be happy to talk with them. Over the next 2 weeks, I got maybe a dozen more messages through the review sites. Some were just people saying thanks for the warning. A few were other former tenants of Mrs. Krause sharing their own stories about her going through their stuff or making up fake violations. One guy said Mrs. Krause had kept his entire deposit, claiming he damaged the carpets when the carpets were already stained before he moved in. Reading all these messages made me realize how many people she had done this to over the years, and how I was probably the first one who actually took her to court and won. 6 months after the whole illegal eviction disaster, I was doing really well in my new apartment. My bank account actually had money in it again because I wasn't spending everything on legal fees and emergency expenses. I had a routine where I went to work, came home, made dinner, and didn't have to worry about my landlord barging in or going through my mail. The property management company that ran my new building was professional and respectful. When they needed to inspect the smoke detectors, they sent an email a week in advance and then a reminder text the day before. When my bathroom sink started leaking, I submitted a maintenance request online, and someone came to fix it within 2 days. Having a normal landlord who followed the rules made such a huge difference in my daily stress levels. I started saving money again, and even opened a small emergency fund so I'd never be that vulnerable again if something went wrong. Then one Tuesday evening, I got an email notification from one of the rental review sites. Someone had posted a new review about a property managed by Krause Family Rentals. I clicked on it immediately and read through the listing. The property was one of Mrs. Krause's rentals, but the listing showed it was managed by her son or nephew or someone with the same last name. I remembered from the plea deal that she was prohibited from being a landlord for 2 years, and this was only 8 months in. I took screenshots of everything, including the property listing, the management company name, and the contact information. Then I sent it all to my lawyer with a message asking if this violated her plea agreement. He responded within an hour saying it definitely looked like a violation and I should report it to the housing board immediately. I went to the housing board website and filled out their online complaint form. I attached all the screenshots and included a detailed explanation of Mrs. Krause's plea agreement and how she appeared to be renting properties under a family member's name to get around the prohibition. I hit submit and got an automatic reply saying they would investigate within 10 business days. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the same housing board investigator who had handled my original complaint. She told me they had investigated and determined that Mrs. Krause was actively involved in managing the properties listed under her family member's name. She was collecting rent, handling tenant issues, and basically doing everything a landlord does while pretending someone else was in charge. The investigator said this was a clear violation of the plea agreement, and they were referring it back to the prosecutor's office for additional penalties. She thanked me for reporting it and said most people wouldn't have bothered to follow up like this. A month after that, my lawyer called me sounding pleased. He said the prosecutor had gone back to court, and Mrs. Krause now faced additional fines for violating her plea agreement. Her prohibition from being a landlord got extended by another full year, and she had to pay more money to the court. My lawyer told me I should feel good about continuing to hold her accountable because most people would have just moved on with their lives after winning their case. He said by staying aware and reporting the violation, I was helping protect future tenants from her predatory practices. I told him it felt like the right thing to do because she clearly hadn't learned anything from the first round of consequences. Around that same time, I started looking into local organizations that helped renters understand their rights. I found a tenants' rights group that met twice a month at a community center near my apartment. I went to my first meeting on a Thursday evening, and there were maybe 15 people sitting in a circle talking about various landlord issues they were dealing with. The group leader was a woman who had been a tenant advocate for like 20 years, and she knew all the local housing laws inside and out. I introduced myself and shared a brief version of my story with Mrs. Krause. Several people in the group said they had heard about my case through the news or online reviews. After the meeting ended, the group leader asked if I'd be interested in volunteering to help other renters navigate the legal system. She said my experience going through an illegal eviction lawsuit made me valuable because I understood the process from a tenant's perspective. I said yes immediately because it felt good to use what I learned to help other people avoid the same problems. Over the next few months, I volunteered at the tenants' rights organization every week. I helped people understand their leases, explained what counted as illegal entry, showed them how to document violations, and connected them with lawyers when they needed legal help. Through the group, I met other people who had successfully fought back against bad landlords. One woman had sued her landlord for refusing to fix a broken heater in winter and won enough money to cover 3 months of hotel costs. Another guy had gotten his landlord fined by the city for multiple building code violations after documenting everything with photos and dated emails. We shared strategies about keeping detailed records, knowing when to involve lawyers versus housing inspectors, and supporting each other through the stress of standing up to people who had more money and power. Being part of this community of people working for change felt way more meaningful than just winning my own case and moving on. 1 year after everything started with Mrs. Krause going through my closet, I sat in my apartment thinking about how different my life was now. I had a great apartment with a professional landlord who respected boundaries and followed the law. I had helped maybe a dozen other tenants through the volunteer organization understand their rights and fight back against unfair treatment. Mrs. Krause was still dealing with consequences from her actions, including the extended prohibition and the additional fines for trying to get around the rules. The whole experience taught me that fighting back against unfair treatment is worth the effort even when it seems scary and expensive at first. I used to be the kind of person who would just accept bad situations and try to keep the peace, but now I knew I could stand up for myself when it mattered. Looking back at everything I went through, from the illegal eviction to the courtroom drama to the ongoing accountability, I felt genuinely happy with how it all turned out. I stood up for myself when Mrs. Krause violated my rights, and I didn't back down even when she tried to intimidate me with threats and countersuits. I won in court and got the money I deserved, plus the satisfaction of seeing her face real consequences. Beyond my own case, I helped protect other people from experiencing the same treatment by posting detailed reviews and reporting her violations and volunteering with the tenants' rights group. My life was stable now with a decent job, a good apartment, and enough savings that I wasn't constantly worried about money. I felt empowered knowing I could handle whatever challenges came next because I had already been through something really difficult and come out okay on the other side.